But it's called The Cancer of Christianity, and it's called Unbelieving Believers. Believers who do not believe. Guys, if you're going to be a Christian, at least do it right. Don't be the washed up, the broken down excuse for a man or a woman of God that the world is so used to seeing. And I want you to be better than that. I want you to be more than that. Don't be the fake half-wit Christian that's only, half the time Christian anyway that the world is used to seeing. The world looks down on Christianity because all they've ever seen for a very long time has been the fake Christianity. People who say they believe and yet don't believe at all. And I'm not necessarily telling you to be perfect, and I'm not telling you to necessarily wear a suit or dress to church or to act better or be just totally perfect. And I'm not necessarily telling you to sell everything you own and give it to the poor, because Jesus did tell a man to do that one time. And honestly, I hope someday that at least one of you in this room that he tells you to do that, because I promise you it will be the richest experience in your life. What I want you to do is to believe God. I want you to believe God when he speaks to you. I want you to believe God when he gives you a mission, when he gives you a directive, when he tells you to go. When he tells you to go and no one else believes that it's God, when everybody else says, no, don't do this, it's not wise, but you know in your heart of hearts, you know that God spoke to you, that God gave you an order. I want you to follow it. And I want you to quit hanging around people that maybe don't believe God. People that are going to say they're Christian, and yet you look at their life, and they don't know God. They don't know God any more than you do. They don't know God at all. And yet they say they're Christian, they go to church, and then maybe they play the game. They may believe in Jesus, but they don't believe on a tactical level. They don't believe on a down-to-earth reality level. It's kind of in an up-here kind of level. In their minds, they know that, there was a guy named Jesus, and they know some things about him, but they don't know him. And, they hear the stories in the Bible, and they hear the stories of the missionaries, and they believe them. They 100% they believe they're true. But you ask them to go out and do something for God, and they say, oh, no, that's not where God's calling me. I don't have that kind of faith, which really means kind of in, down-to-earth English is kind of back off me, bro. I'm not thrilled about this. A Christian who is not willing to do something about the world they live in and take a stand for God and share the gospel is not a Christian. They're a liar. Because to be a Christian is to be like Christ. Jesus didn't even have a home, and he didn't have a job. He didn't have a wife or a car or a retirement plan. He chose celibacy, he chose poverty, and he chose suffering because he chose God. He rejected the world. He knew that money destroys people, and he wanted nothing to do with it. When some first-century neighborhood watchmen came to his friend Peter, and they got on to him about him and Jesus paying this tax, and Peter kind of freaked out a little bit because they didn't have any money. Any money they would have had, they gave to the poor. And so he goes to Jesus, and he says, Jesus, these people are coming after me for taxes. The IRS is after me. Jesus tells him, don't worry about it, man. Go fishing. And I'm not kidding you. This is in that Bible. You just got to read it. He says, go fishing. And so Peter goes fishing. And, y'all may know the story, but he casts out his net, and the first fish he catches, he opens his mouth, and there was a gold coin inside of this fish. And that coin was enough to pay the tax for him and for Jesus. Which means, just for that moment, just to prove to Peter that when you follow God, he's going to take care of you, and he's going to stick with you, and he's going to supply your needs. God went through the whole process of some random occasion of a coin being thrown into the lake, a fish happening to see it, grabbing it, swallowing it, and then somehow not dying, and then Peter catching that fish. God arranged all this and did this miracle just to prove to Peter that he's real and that he's going to be with them. And see, when he says you got to do, some of you want to be closer to God. You want to know him in a deeper way maybe. The answer to that is obedience. Feeling God's presence is amazing. But you can be close to God and not feel him. It's called obedience. He says obedience is worth more than anything to God. Because obedience says you trust him. And God doesn't typically tell us to do simple little things like, Sierra, I want you to brush your teeth in the morning. That's probably not the voice of God. That's the voice of a Sierra that knows better. And so, typically, if God is speaking to us in a loud enough way for us to hear clearly, and it may not be like an audible outside your head voice, it may just be a deep voice in your spirit that speaks to you. It's typically going to be something pretty serious, because He doesn't just do that for no reason. He says and you do, and it all works out okay. You know, I mean, I'm not saying you have to be perfect and obey every off-the-wall religious law out there, but you do need to obey God. Because you only get one life. You have from this moment that you are sitting here listening to me. Think about this. You have from right now until the day you die. Between here and then, there is nothing else between this time frame. You don't know when you're going to die. You could be 15. You could be 150. But you have between there and now. There's no redos. There's no restarts. You know, I know sometimes we play games, and so it's like, it's so easy for us without even thinking about it to, you know, even though we know we only get one life, it's somewhere in our mind we kind of have this idea like maybe next time I'm going to try it this way. You know, without realizing we only get one life. God's given us one life. And you have two choices what you can do with it. You can live for the world, and you can live in a way that's very, very easy for you to explain to the people around you. You know, you can have a good job, you're making good money, and it's very easy to explain to the people in church, like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, you know, life is going good. And that makes sense. They're not going to question it. But when you stand in front of God, when you stand in heaven's courtroom and the record of your life is pulled up and read out loud, what are you going to say then? When He says, I gave you this gift, I called you to be a preacher. I called you to be a prophet. I had a mission for you. I had a nation that I wanted you to lead to the Lord. And you worked an 8-to-5 job your entire life, and you never did anything. There's a story of a master who has 3 servants, and to one he gives, you know, let's say $10,000, to one he gives $5,000, and to one he gives $1,000. And he leaves. And the one at the $10,000 and the one at the $5,000, they took the money they had and they went out and they did something with it. They invested it. And so when the master came home, they had more to give him than what he left them with. But the one at the $1,000 got scared because he said, I can't do it. This isn't very much. You know, all I know how to do is sing good. You know, what can I do with that? I can't do anything for God. And so he hid his money. He hid the gift. And he hid it underground. And he left it alone so he wouldn't lose it. You know, it's the girl that said, well, I'm going to sing in the shower and, you know, maybe sing, you know, and worship a little bit, but I'm never really going to launch out and fulfill the calling on my life. God may be calling you to be a worship leader for a nation. But you have to believe Him. You have to take those steps. And sometimes it means taking a step of faith when around you it doesn't look like it's going to work out, but you have to trust God because you know the mission He's put inside of you. And so this man that had hidden this $1,000, the master came home, and he was well pleased with the one that had doubled the $10,000, and he doubled the $5,000. And then the one with the $1,000, he says, you know, I didn't want to waste it. I didn't want to waste it all. I didn't want to lose it. I wanted to be able to give you something. And so he undug the $1,000 and he gave it back to the master, and he was furious. He was mad. I can't say other words in here because this is church, but he was mad. So he, you know, and so he took the $1,000 and he gave it to the one at the $10,000 that now had $20,000. And he laid down this principle in the kingdom of God where whatever God gives you, if you're good with it, if you're faithful with it, if you use it, if you do like God told you to do with it, He's going to give you more, and it's going to double. And, you know, there's kind of this idea that, you know, if one man lays down his anointing, if one man is called to do a certain mission, and he won't do it, that God will give it to somebody else. There's a story in this Bible where a lady named Deborah was called to revive the nation of Israel and lead them into battle. And there was one last fight. There was one huge battle that was about to happen between Israel and another nation. And she went to the king and said, God is with you. You need to lead your troops in the battle. You're the man. You're the king. You need to rise up, get on your horse, take out your sword, and lead them into battle like a king. And he was afraid because he didn't trust God. He didn't believe. And so he said, Deborah, I will go, but only if you ride with me, only if you're right there next to me. You know, he didn't trust that God would be just with him. He knew that God was with Deborah, and he knew Deborah told him that God was going to be with him too. But he didn't believe it. So instead, he was embarrassed. He's someone that throughout all of history, people have been ashamed of because he was afraid to ride with God. He had to have, you know, nothing against women, but, typically women did not fight back then. Women typically the men fought back then. You know, things are a little bit different today. But he had to have a woman right with him because he was too afraid to man up and fight himself. And so he didn't get the glory for it. He didn't get the reputation for it. He's a reputation for eternity as a scaredy cat. But see, when you follow God, when you choose God's plan, things don't always look right to the world. Sometimes it's very difficult to explain your choice to the world. When I finished Bible school and I went back up to Duncan, and my plan was to move up there, I had an opportunity to go to college for free. I was going to go to school. I was going to marry Hannah in March, and then we were going to live up there, and I was going to have a good career and maybe do a little preaching here and there, maybe someday go into ministry. But I couldn't do it. The call of God, the pull was so strong. This was my best friend, Jesus, telling me, this isn't what I want for your life. Please, please, please don't waste your life this way. And I'm not saying he doesn't tell people to go to college. He does. There are people that God sends to college because God sends us in so many different directions. But you've got to know what God's saying for your life. You've got to know his mission for you. And so I made the choice. It was very, very hard to do, but I chose to come back to East Texas. You know, and God has met my every need. There have been times we've struggled, but God has always been faithful and always taken care of us. And I know I'm following the plan that he has for my life right now. And I don't always like it. It's not always fun. Sometimes I want to go do something else, but I trust God. And, you know, it was hard to explain. I had a sister who was in college. She's now a nurse. And it was hard to explain to her and her friends why I made this choice. And they mocked me for it. They made fun of me for it. They called me an idiot because I was choosing God over money. And so they didn't get it. And so, yeah, it's hard to explain it to them. I mean, they see now that God's been really good to me. But it was hard to explain it to them, and they didn't get it right then. But I know when I stand in heaven that it's going to make sense to God because it was obedience. Because one day, if you choose to follow God in this life, you're going to stand in front of him, and he's going to say, well done. He's going to say, that's my boy. That's my girl. I'm proud of you. You did exactly what I asked you to. I'm so proud of you. I've been bragging about you for centuries, and I will brag about you for centuries. Come on in. But you got to know, where is God calling you? Because he calls every man, but very few of us answer. And you got to know, where does he want you? What is he telling you? Because we get into situations in our life, and we don't ask God before we do it. Sometimes we get into relationships. You know, I've been in relationships like that where you don't ask God beforehand. You just do it, and then you get attached to somebody. And it's like, you know what's wrong, but you can't break away. You don't know how to. You can't do it in your own strength. But sometimes God is telling you to break it off with a girl or with a boy because he's going to end up damning you to hell and ruining your life. And so he's telling you now, he's saying, end this now before you completely miss the plan I have for your life. You know, I mean, if there's a man or a woman that God brings into your life, it's going to be an honorable thing. It's going to be something done in the light. You know, there are things done in darkness, there are things done in light. There are things done in darkness that you hide from your parents, you hide from your friends, the people around you. You don't want anyone to know about it. You're ashamed of it. You're afraid of people finding out. And those are the things you stay away from. And then there are things that you're proud of. There are things, you know, when I met Hannah and started dating her, I was proud of it. I could tell anybody. And I had a good conscience because I knew in my heart this was the woman God told me to be with. But if you got to lie to people to even spend time with this person, to even go do something with this person, or if they're causing you to lie, if they're causing you to be in sin, to be away from God, you need to leave this person. You need to end it immediately because it's just going to get worse. It doesn't get better. Those kind of things don't get better. And I'm not saying that someday God might reunite you with that person, but I'm telling you, if you don't end it now, it's not going to be what you dreamed of. Maybe you dream of settling down with somebody that you love, you know, but right now is not the time. Right now, if you try to go ahead with that dream, you may ruin it. The marriage may last 6 months, and then next thing you know, it's all over because you didn't wait. God had things set up for you. God has timing. He has resources and things he wants to bring into your life, but it's all set up on a time frame, his time frame. And so we've got to stay on this time frame so we can bring things in. If we get into a situation that he wants us in down here, and we get into it here, and all this stuff ready for us for things to be perfect, not that it's not going to be hard, but we're going to make it through up here. We get into it here, it's going to fall apart. It wasn't the right time. You know, maybe God's telling you to get rid of the Xbox or the PlayStation because you're spending all your time there and it's going to end up ruining you and you're going to waste your life and your education. And you're going to end up as a lazy boy who sits in his mama's lazy boy for the rest of his life and lives off his parents. I've seen it happen. I have friends that they were good kids. They were good people. They had bright futures. Started college. Could not get away from the Xbox. Too addicted to it. Couldn't break the hold on it. And so they ended up staying late every night playing Xbox. And then they go to school, and then they're asleep every day in school. And then they end up failing their classes. And then they drop out of college. And 10 years later, they still haven't done anything with their life. They're working as a waiter. And it's like, this happens. It's like you don't see it now. But you have to look at where you're at. Look at what's in your life right now, the things around you, the things you spend your time on. And think, 10 years from now, what am I going to look like doing what I'm doing right now? Because I promise, nothing magically changes. You've got to make a choice if you're going to change something. If you're going to make a different habit or get rid of something, you've got to make that choice. It doesn't just happen. You can't count on that happening. You have to make the choice to break away from these things. Because, I mean, for one thing, video games, I hate to see it because I know so many people my age and older, and they never grew up. They come home, maybe they're married with kids, and they come home and play that Xbox for 6 hours. They just have them. And those things are toys. And it's like the first step to growing up is to get rid of these toys. So when it comes that time, when it's like, I'm tired of being a kid, I'm tired of being immature, you got to put the childish things away. Paul says that in the Bible. He says, when I became a man, I put the childish things away. And it is never too soon to grow up. It is, there's a time when you're going to get to enjoy some of these things being a kid. No one's going to take that away from you. But there are habits that are going to keep you as a child. And no one wants a grown man who's 25 acting like he's still 14. They don't make it. And there's a surprisingly large amount of them in the world. Marriages are failing. Houses are breaking up because men are not willing to grow up. And so as men, you guys have to promise me, you have to grow up at some point. You cannot, some of the things you're doing now, they're okay. You want to play some Xbox right now, not a big deal at your age, but there's got to hit a point where you're like, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm ready to grow up and be a man because this country is failing because families and houses do not have the leadership they need of a strong mom and a strong dad willing to uphold it and fight for their household. And so there's going to be a time when you're going to have that moment where it's like, I got to grow up now. I got to put these things away now and become a man. When it hits that point, the Bible says, flee from youthful lust. Flee from the childish things. But when God calls you, you have to answer. You don't get to say no, or you don't get to just ignore it. When God calls you, there's a deep calling inside you. Something inside you knows. And you don't get to just ignore it and let it go away. At some point, you're either going to tell it yes or you're going to say no. You're going to make that decision. There's no way to just walk through it and ignore it. You have to say yes or no. God will not let you ignore it. He will make you choose an answer. And so choose Him. Because see, and it's not enough just to believe. You have to obey Him. And so to do that, it takes something called faith. Faith is believing in God. And then obedience is acting out on that. Faith and obedience are like two sides of the same coin. If someone tells you they have faith in God and they believe in God, but they don't act that out, they don't live that, they're lying to you. Because you cannot separate the two. That's a lie. It's called dead faith. The book of James calls it dead faith. Do not act on what you believe. If I told you that this building is on fire, it is burning to the ground, you would run out that door as fast as you could. Elijah would probably jump over that fire escape right there, because I know him. But you would get out of here, because you believe it's on fire. So you're not just going to sit there and let it burn, because you don't want to burn up with it. You're going to run. I mean, do you see how this works? If you really believe something, you're going to act on it. If your belief does not cause you to act, you don't believe it at all. It's fake. Get rid of it and believe something else. And see, I got to ask you, are you scared to do anything? Are you scared? So many Christians are locked up in fear. It's not necessarily that something scares them. It's just fear. Fear of messing up. Fear of failing. Fear that if you step out, that you're actually going to miss God, when in fact God's the one telling you to go and telling you to act out and to take that step. I don't believe that God's telling you to stay home. I will find you a story real quick in this Bible where God told a man to stay home. Turn to not one. There is not a story in the Bible where God told a man to stay home. He told Adam to go out and conquer the earth. He told Abraham to leave everything he'd ever known and go to a place he would show him. He didn't know where he was going. He had no idea where he was going. God said, go that way. And Abraham said, okay. Imagine if you got in your car, the GPS is on, and it says, turn right here. And you're like, where am I going? It just says, turn right here. And you turn. You don't know where you're going. Abraham had no idea. His family, his friends, everything he had ever known was right there for him, with him. They were together. It was a big family. He was happy. He was wealthy. Everything was good. And God told him to go. He made him a promise. He says, Abraham, I'm going to ask you to do something crazy. And if you'll believe me, if you'll follow me, and see, he believed and followed, God said, I will make a nation out of you, more numerous than the stars in the sky. You know, and Abraham said, okay. And so he went. He told Noah, go out and make yourself look like a fool, be mocked, ridiculed, have them throw their beer bottles at you and laugh at you when you fall, and build a boat. He may not have even known what a boat was, first off. God had to explain it to him. Second, they didn't know what rain was in Noah's day. It had never rained ever. It was not like they knew what it was and it just hadn't happened yet. The idea of water falling from the sky sounded stupid to them. They had no idea what he was talking about. They thought he was crazy. They said, lock him up in Old Time State Hospital because he's crazy. And so God was doing something new, but Noah obeyed. And sometimes God will tell you to do something that maybe you can't find anyone else that's ever done that before. But you have to believe, because God does tell us to do things. Moses, you know, after his little deal with Egypt the first time, when he killed a man and ran in the desert, he had a happy life. 40 years had gone by since he left Egypt. He was a shepherd. He had sheep in the desert. He had a nice camel, brand new 2014 camel. He had his father-in-law and his family, his wife, probably some kids. I mean, things were going good. And then God shows up in his life, and he tells him, I want you to go into the most powerful country in the entire world. I want you to stand in front of the most powerful man in the entire world that has all the money, all the army. And I want you to tell him to let 3 million slaves go free right now. And I want you to tell him if he doesn't do it, I'm going to start judging him, and he's going to face my wrath. This is a shepherd going to talk to basically the king of the world right now, one of the biggest nations and empires at that time, and tell him what to do. But Moses did it. He was scared. He was terrified. And he tried to get out of it, and God didn't let him go. God is not going to let you get out of something like that. If you ever have a burning bush moment where God is telling you to go, you better just go, because it'll be better off for you. And Moses didn't just immediately go. He tried to get out of it, and so he ended up having to have an assistant help him. And that way, you know, God wanted to just give all this to Moses. This incredible story. God already knew what was going to happen. He wanted to give it to Moses and let Moses be the man of the hour, but Moses refused to go by himself. And so he brought his brother Aaron in to be his priest and to kind of help him get through this. So, you know, it's better off, and it'll be less embarrassment for you in the future if you just go when God says go. He told Joshua to take his entire army and march around the most heavily fortified city in the entire world that could not be broken down. The walls of the city called Jericho could not be broken by man's armies. And so he told Joshua to take his army and march around it for 7 days. And I have no doubt that they were throwing rocks at them. They were probably pouring burning tar on them, shooting arrows at them, whatever else they had, throwing spears at them. So he probably lost a lot of men doing this, but for 7 days he walked around this city, this fortress. And on that 7th day, not only that, God said the 7th day, Mark walked around it 7 times. And then yell. Yell and have the priests blow a horn, and the walls are going to fall. And Joshua did it. He did it. He didn't even question it. It was amazing. He just did it. At one point, God told the weakest man in Israel to stand up and set the people free. His name was Gideon. God had Gideon send almost his entire army home. Gideon had a massive army that he trained up. He sent all of them home but like 300 people because God wanted the glory for it. And so he sent Gideon and these 300 men against a massive army. But God came down and Gideon won. I mean, do you see what I'm getting at here? There's a time when a man who was like 13 feet tall, covered from head to toe in solid armor, with a sword the size of your daddy, yelled at the army of Israel and cursed their God. And a teenager who knew his God said, no way. He picked up a slingshot, he ran into battle, and he won. His name was David, and he became the king of Israel. But not before being chased across hundreds of miles by a king and his army who wanted him dead. And not before becoming the most well-known, most feared warrior in history up to that point. David, by the time he became king, was a man of war. He was known as a legend, like a legendary soldier in that time. Because he picked up a sling, and he believed God, and he refused to let somebody mock his God that way. And he ran into battle without fear because he believed his God. And you cannot tell me that you know Jesus and still live in fear. None of these men knew fear. They knew their God, and because they knew their God, they did not know fear. It does not mean they did not get scared, but they did not live in fear. And so you can't tell me you know Jesus and live in fear, because I won't believe you, and neither will the rest of the world. If you try to tell me that, I will probably call you a liar. And so will everybody in this book. Because if your Jesus doesn't make you feel bulletproof, like you can run through an army and leap over a wall, you've got the wrong Jesus. If that's not the Jesus you have, you've got a weak Jesus. If the Jesus you believe in is okay with sex, and he's okay with you wasting your life on the couch playing Xbox, and he doesn't mind if you cuss a little, and drink a little, and look at porn when your parents aren't home, and do all sorts of other things that will ruin your life, then the Jesus you believe in sucks. Because if that's the Jesus you know, then you don't know Jesus. There's only one. If your Jesus doesn't care enough about your soul to demand that you throw these things out of your life and get serious, your Jesus doesn't care about you. But my Jesus does. My Jesus, see, your Jesus, if he makes you feel good about yourself, you've got the wrong Jesus, because my Jesus makes me feel good about him. And your Jesus says you're perfect the way you are, but my Jesus sees the mess that I am, and he loves me anyway. He doesn't pretend I'm any better than I am, but he doesn't abandon me for it either, because I'm messed up. He calls me to be brave, and he calls me to live for him. My Jesus hates fear. He hates doubt. And this Bible says the fearful and the unbelieving will have their place in the lake of fire. Because that's how it works. When you know God, fear is a thing of the past. Perfect love casts out all fear. When you know God, you know his love. It fills you. You're not scared anymore. It's not because you're confident in yourself. It's because you're confident in the God who walks with you. And you know he's with you. And so you can't have fear and have God. And so if you have fear right now, and if that's the voice you're listening to, you don't have the Lord. That's why it says the fearful and the unbelieving have their place in the lake of fire. And if you haven't met the Jesus I'm telling you about, then you haven't met any Jesus, because he's the only one. And if you haven't met him yet, then you're not safe. And don't let anyone convince you you're going to heaven if you can't get alone and be with the Lord, and it's real. Because when you meet Jesus, you're born again. When you meet Jesus, the Spirit of God lives inside of you, and he doesn't leave. And I don't care what you think or believe. The Bible says, oh, you believe that Jesus is Lord? That's cool. So do the demons. The demons believe he's Lord. And they tremble in fear. They shake when they think about it. It scares them to death, because they know that one day this Jesus is going to judge them and throw them into the lake of fire. And you may be thinking, well, I asked Jesus into my heart one time when I was like 6. That's not in this Bible. This Bible does not tell me, or you, or anybody, you can ask Jesus into your heart, or say a neat little prayer, and you're going to be saved. This Bible says, when you know God, that's when salvation comes from. And so I want to ask right now, is there anyone in here right now listening to me who you can really ask yourself right now and think, do I really know Jesus? And don't convince yourself you do. Don't assume that you do. Because if you assume, then you're not sure. And if you're not sure, then you don't. If you're not sure 100%, beyond a shadow of a doubt, ready for a man to put a gun to your head and pull the trigger, sure that you're saved, you're not. Because once you are, you will know, and it'll never leave you. If there's anyone in here right now, Cassie or Heather or Elijah or anybody in here right now, that you know this is not the Jesus you know, but you want to, I want you to stand up. Is there anybody? If you're brave enough to stand up in front of these other people and say, I want to know the real Jesus. Because I'm tired of this excuse that I have for a God. I've made God in my own image. My God looks just like me. My God acts like me. If that's a God you know, stand up, because you need to know the real God tonight, because this is serious. If your God is okay with the way that you're living when your parents aren't home and when your parents aren't around, when you're just with your friends, if your God is okay with that, then you're not serving God at all. You made your own idol. It may not be a physical statue, but it's an idol still. And if you stood up, I'm proud of you. And I want you to come to this cross, and I want you to kneel down.